Hey there, everybody. Our Hangout series continues here as part of Innovation for the Nation. Before we get into our content for this 30-minute session, want to remind all of you to find the survey tab within our virtual environment that you guys have been hanging out in for the last 2 days. That survey is going to give us feedback on what we've accomplished here over these 2 days. Also, you have an opportunity to share if you'd like to be involved in more of these types of events. So I do encourage you to fill that survey out for us. We really do appreciate that. Also want to continue to invite you to use the hashtag IFTN13 on Twitter. That's how you can share with other folks that are attending the virtual summit. You can also submit your questions that way. The other way to do questions is over on the Networking Lounge tab. Go into the Networking Lounge, go over to the message boards, select that question and answer, the QA message board. You can submit questions to us there as well. We're moving close to the end of our Hangout sessions. 2 more to go. Our closing keynote will take place at 1 p.m. Pacific time, coming up in just about an hour from now. But before that, we've scheduled this 30-minute session, which we think is really going to bring together a lot of the topics that we've talked about, topics and stories about Chromebooks and geospacing, the use of Gmail and mapping and all that, kind of bring it together in the story of the virtual office initiative of the Georgia Pardons and Paroles group. Really a case study here, usage of, again, Google Apps and Maps and Chromebooks. What we're going to do, this is going to go back to our interview style, no slides or anything that you're going to be seeing on the screen for this, but a conversation between Phil Sellers, the CIO of the Georgia Pardons and Paroles Department, and Dan Israel, the head of government marketing at Google. Now, one of the things Dan does in his role is really highlight the success use cases of Google technologies. That's why we have invited him here, especially with all the government customers, to really talk about that. So I will keep an eye on Twitter and some of the other feeds in terms of questions, comments. We'll probably take the last 10 minutes to mix in the audience questions and ideas, but Dan is going to be our leader here for the next 20 minutes going through that conversation with Phil. So Dan, welcome. Thank you, sir, for being here.
Fantastic. Thank you, James. And Phil, we really appreciate you being here to tell your story. Why don't we give people a little bit of context? You've been working for the government for quite a long time, but your role at Pardons and Paroles is quite new. Can you talk about what motivated you to come over into this new job?
Well, certainly. I appreciate being part of the event, and it's been a great event so far. My career with public safety began with the Georgia Department of Corrections about 24 years ago. And I started out in the capacity of a probation officer, and very soon moved into prison counseling work, and then moved up to deputy warden of a large close security prison, and eventually found my way working in central office, where I discovered that I had an interest and affinity for IT, and ended my stay with the Georgia Department of Corrections as the CIO IT director. In January of 12, I was invited to join the management team of the State Board of Pardons and Paroles. There was a lot of exciting things going on there, so I chose to move over to the sister agency, as it were, and begin my career with parole.
Great. Now, working with these offenders probably ends up being a pretty high-pressure type job. So I'm wondering if you can give people some insight into who are the people who do this job and what motivates them.
Well, certainly. Our agency is comprised of about 665 staff members, and we have really 2 primary functions, the first of which is clemency and parole review for about 60,000 incarcerated individuals in the state of Georgia. Now, our other major function, which we'll be talking about largely here today, is parole supervision in the community. And we have about 300 some odd assistant chiefs and chief parole officers and parole officers doing community supervision in the field. And what we find is that there's really kind of 2 kinds of folks that are coming to this particular job. And there's those that come straight out of college with a criminal justice degree, for instance. Then we have another group that are sometimes coming off of a law enforcement career, another type of law enforcement career, and or retired military. And what we see is folks get drawn to this sort of work kind of for 2 general reasons. One is the law enforcement aspect of the job. The other is sort of the counseling, social service aspect of the job. But what we know is that in order to be truly successful as a parole officer, it really requires a blend of those skills, both counseling and law enforcement.
Got it. Okay. Now, to dive into this virtual office project, about the time you got there to Pardons and Paroles, they were kicking off this initiative. Can you tell us what motivated? Why did people think that a virtual office might be a good idea?
Well, it's the virtual office initiative kind of came about as on the tail end or as a result of and in conjunction with a fairly large initiative in Georgia started by Governor Nathan Deal with criminal justice reform. They spent a couple of years as a high-level committee looking at the whole spectrum of criminal justice in Georgia, and a lot of findings and research that came out of that effort pointed toward that more of a focus toward community corrections and reentry issues really was the thing to do to have the biggest bang for the buck in terms of dealing with offenders. So in conjunction with that, we decided at Parole to change our approach and go to what we call the virtual office initiative, which essentially means taking brick and mortar office sites, traditional office sites where parolees would come to visit officers, and shut those down and replace those with virtual teams of officers in the field. So what we asked for and were granted is the ability to redirect real estate savings and so forth from shutting down those offices and pointing those savings into technology needs for the officers, additional equipment, additional vehicles for the officers to be riding in, and move toward a virtual office strategy. So 38 offices were closed and officers were properly outfitted with technology and equipment to effectively live virtually in the field and do their supervision jobs.
So it makes a lot of sense to me, I think, that getting people out of the office and out into the community and working more directly with the people who they're responsible for supervising would be beneficial. Can you talk a little bit more in detail about how's a typical officer's day different from the old way to the new virtual office way? Well,
in a virtual office setting, or actually in a traditional office setting, what a lot of the feedback from the staff was that quite often supervision could take a back seat or be replaced by whatever's happening in the office that day, being reactive to whatever events are occurring in the office that day. In a virtual environment, when an officer gets up in the morning, goes out into the vehicle and starts doing their work, they are tightly focused on their own caseload and executing their own supervision plan for the day to go out and see the offenders in the community. So there's far less interruption and so forth. But it takes a little bit of pre-planning about how you're going to go out and make your rounds and make your visits. Now, from a supervisory perspective, a chief parole officer's perspective, obviously they're not seeing the officers walking up and down the hallways, so staying connected and staying in tune with the officers is a little bit more of a challenge. And that's where we come into talking about Google Apps for Government and the collaborative nature of that platform, allowing for things like Hangouts like we're doing here today, right, and the idea of presence and chat and video chat on the fly when they're ready to talk face to face, so they can stay connected even though they're geographically separated.
So I can imagine that they might have been worried that some of the camaraderie that you get when you're in the same building together might be lost. Do they do team hangouts? Does the senior person get everyone on the group together every day or once a week to kind of make sure they're all seeing each other?
They do, and that's an area that they're getting used to, and it's becoming part of the culture to be able to do it that way, because it is all fairly new technology to us. But the ones that are engaging in it find it a very, very easy and kind of a natural thing to do. It's a natural extension of face to face, and once they kind of learn the technology, it really flows well. So
yeah.
That's
now, having been involved with many technology projects over the years, I've come to understand that one of the biggest challenges of any project is change management. Getting your users ready for what's coming, making sure they have access to resources that can help them if they run into any trouble. So what sort of work did you do to prepare and get everyone ready for this switch, which is not an insignificant change?
Yep, it was quite a change, and in the run-up to the change, we did a lot of looking around, and what we knew at the state of affairs at the time of making the decision was that we were a Lotus Notes shop and had been in Lotus Notes for about 15 years, and it was only email. But we knew that with our officers being constantly on the move and essentially in the community on a full-time basis, that they would need to be effective wherever they are. Wherever they happen to be standing, they need to be effective with their tools. So right from the get-go, we knew that we wanted a collaborative platform that the officer could flow from a phone to a tablet-style device to a laptop and then to a Chromebook and back and forth as the tactical situation dictated. So we chose Google Apps for Government to be our communication collaboration platform. And the local Google shop in Atlanta was tremendously helpful in educating us about the capabilities of the platform. And we also selected a Google partner, Cloud Sherpas, to assist us with the migration, which was a very important thing for us because they really infused in our IT team the knowledge and skill that we would need to effect a smooth transition. So by the time we effected the Cloud Sherpas plan and we moved forward, we really transitioned 665 staff members in about a 90-day time frame. And some of the techniques and strategies that we did to do that were online webinars provided by Cloud Sherpas that staff could watch over and over. We also infused into the scenario an integrated Boost e-learning short video training application that integrates with Google Apps so that officers could view at their own in their own time frame and learn the skills. So all in all, those things proved to be very effective at assisting us in conveying to staff what was coming, and then as it was happening, they were very important tools for the staff to lean back on if they had questions.
Did you bring people together for in-person training, or it was mostly virtual?
We considered it at first, but then when we saw what the capability of the virtual training could do, we decided it wasn't necessary. We did it with a series of about 14 webinars of an hour and a half apiece. And then Cloud Sherpas prepared for us a quite a good learning site that the staff could go back to and have reference materials.
I guess it wouldn't make a lot of sense to have in-person training for a virtual office, right? You got to drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak.
Yeah, true.
So talk about what the users have told you. What do they think? Are there challenges? Are there things that have worked better than expected?
Well, one thing that we suspected would happen, and we're quite pleased that it did happen, is that, for instance, our training division did a phenomenal job of embracing the Google Apps suite of tools. In specific, they took the Google Sites capability and in very short order built out several really nice websites that have to do with internal training issues, calendaring of training of sessions. They put all of the board policies on a Google site with keyword search, and 4 or 5 other examples of different kinds of uses of Google Site. Now the key thing for me as an IT director, CIO, is that they did it from a layman's perspective, and it came out quite professional looking, and was very effective. And I've been told repeatedly that in the days prior, they would have had to seek IT's assistance, wait a lengthy period of time until something could be built out for them. In this case, they just were able to take the tool, do the learning site instructions, as it were, and come out with a professional-looking product that really made an impact in their business. Now, in terms of the line officers, I hear, repeatedly that they're loving the technology, the ability to collaborate on the move, on documents and so forth with each other, and the idea of presence and hangout and all the things we've been talking about have been a game changer for them in being able to stay connected. I don't know that I think our virtual office initiative would have been far more difficult had those tools not been available to us. So those are the things that kind of made it effective and made it a realistic possibility.
Right. Now, let's just get into a couple more specifics here. You've talked about Chromebooks, you've talked about Android phones. Are there specific devices that you've issued to everyone? Are you giving people choice of what device they like?
Well, you've mentioned Android phones. That one of the things we did right at exactly in parallel to the Google Apps rollout was we rolled out 550 Android phone devices. Prior to that, officers were using traditional flip phones, not smartphones. And the fact that they could have their full collaborative experience in the palm of their hand was a huge selling point in the adoption of the new culture of Google Apps. So the officers find it really, really handy to be able to have key documents in their Google Drive on their handheld device, and being able to access their Google account from any machine, wherever they happen to be. Doesn't have to be the phone, could be any machine. But from a tactical strategy, one thing that we know is that we want the flexibility for officers to be able to flow from device to device, be it a phone or a tablet or Chromebook or a laptop. We want the flexibility to be able to do efficient work across all platforms as the need arises.
Sure.
So currently we're experimenting with Chromebook in the field, and it's an exciting idea for us in that the 10-second boot time or under 10-second boot time on a Chromebook device, the officers we've tested it on really love that. It's sort of instant work. When they open the lid, it's ready to go. And then from an IT perspective, the idea that the device is interchangeable and requires very little setup and very little support, and is easily, you can easily have an officer up and running in literally seconds on a new device, is a big change.
So if one of their virtual offices runs over their device, then
it's we had been deploying full-on Windows type machines with the full Microsoft Office suite, which are time intensive to set up and time intensive to repair when they do have problems and so forth. So the whole Chromebook strategy is a really, really appealing thing. So we're in the process now of tuning our internal case management apps to be optimized for Chrome browser and Chrome environment. So, but the future looks really bright for us on the Chromebook model.
Well, that's great to hear. Now, for each officer who's out there in the community and working with offenders, how many people or how many cases are they working with typically?
The average caseload size, it kind of depends on the type of caseload they're carrying, but about 80 cases per officer.
And they have to see
across
those
the community.
people how frequently?
Depending on the severity of the case or the level of the case, they'll see them monthly, sometimes more than that. But it depends on the case itself. But
so I imagine that having to get around and see a lot of different people in different places, like mapping has got to be an important tool for your officers.
It is, and it's going to be an increasingly important tool. In my experience with the Georgia Department of Corrections, we actually engaged in Google Maps APIs and using Google Map technology within our case management applications. And we're doing the same thing here at the State Board of Pardons and Paroles, in that we're already mapping our agency locations with mouse over, and it comes up with the details of the site and what counties are served and so forth. But we're taking mapping to even further levels, in that we believe that a geospatial visual representation of the work is really, really important. So the capability to map an officer's caseload in the community, map the circuit's caseload for a group of officers, map the entire state, or map around a radius point showing where the offenders are living, or capabilities that'll assist the officer as they navigate around the community day to day. And our mapping strategy is going to be that the icons are actually dynamic based on the status of the case. So officers have to see offenders on a dialogue, on a cadence. So if perhaps they haven't seen that person for the month, it's flashing a different color. It's telling them, giving them a visual indication of this one needs action. So we believe that the mapping strategy is the thing that's going to tie together the team experience in the community and provide the common operational picture for how things are going. So a chief parole officer or somebody from central office or the officers themselves can kind of see visually the work and how the work is progressing.
I can almost imagine the power of that map with the different points and the different colors really giving the officer an indication of where they need to focus their energy.
Right.
Before the maps, or maybe you're not quite there with the maps, how are they finding that information today? Is it in a Word document? Is it in a spreadsheet, or is it on paper?
Well, it's kind of a combination, because our case management systems did not lend themselves to mobility in the past. So what they would have to do is sit down and print out lists of addresses and names of places they were going and sort of plan it that way. So our vision for the future is extending the maps capability and providing that sort of geospatial mapping view on the move, regardless of device. And one of the points about virtual office is that the whole idea is to build stronger relationships with community service providers in the community, service providers in the community, other law enforcement in the community, which we work with quite often. And in those kinds of tactical situations, a visual representation of here's the offenders, this is where they live, can be a very valuable tool in assisting with different kinds of operations that are ongoing.
Sure. Now, obviously, your work is focused on pardons and paroles, and I can see how this makes sense in a variety of different law enforcement contexts. But there's a lot of other government workers who are out there in the field, you know, whether it's social services agencies, whether it's people who are responsible for doing a whole range of different types of inspections, people in public works. I don't know if you've been approached by other agencies in Georgia, but if someone were to come to you and say, you know, what advice do you have, Phil? You've done this. We also have a similar type of workforce. What should we think about if we were going to consider a virtual office? What would you tell them?
Well, I think, you know, from my perspective, you know, case management is case management, right? And, I mean, we have a law enforcement flair to it, obviously, with the work that we're doing. But knowing things about people and where those people live, you know, in terms of using mapping technology, you know, this suite of Google Apps for Government certainly lends itself toward that and the mapping capability. My advice would be, when you're evaluating a product like this, you know, one of the things I think not to do is to try to compare maybe your existing email to email and compare documents to documents and spreadsheets to spreadsheets, but think about the suite of products as a whole, and that it's a new environment for the officer to work in, you know, more collaboratively and in a more connected way, and it really works in conjunction as a whole. And I think my final advice would be, I thought it was going to be a lot more painful than it was. It was actually a pretty easy transition, all in all. You know, with the proper preparation, the proper tools, the proper training, it really went rather smooth. So I would say, come on in, water's fine.
That's good to hear. Good to hear. I guess one other thing I'd ask, and then James, I'll hand it back to you for questions that I'm sure are coming in from our audience. How are you going to evaluate the success? And what are the metrics you look at? How do you know, is this virtual office thing a good thing?
Well, we do. It is really early yet, but we do have some preliminary findings, and what we're seeing is that in terms of face-to-face contacts, meaning an officer having face-to-face contact with an offender, those are up, and we did this past 6 months against the prior 6 months as a case study. And what we're seeing is that the data is trending in the right direction. It's early yet, but it's trending in the right direction, and that face-to-face contacts are up about 23%. Parole completions, like successful completions of parole, have largely remained the same. They haven't tanked or gone in the wrong direction. And parole revocations, meaning the instance where you have to revoke somebody's parole and send them back to prison for one reason or another, are slightly down. So we're hopeful about those statistics that they're trending in the right way, and you know, so far. And what we believe is that more time in the community, focused on in the environment where the offenders live, making stronger relationships with other law enforcement and stronger relationships with other community providers, just makes sense. It makes sense to supervise the offender where they live, and it's shown from research to be effective in doing that. And if we outfit the officer with the right tools and techniques, it's doable, and we can track it and so forth.
Well, we'll have to invite you back next year, Phil, to give us an update on how things are looking once you had a little more time. Now, James, I could ask him questions all afternoon, but I think we've got a schedule to stick to, so I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right, perfect, Dan. Yeah, a couple questions here that have been coming in through, again, the networking lounge where the message board's QA. You can use that, and over on Twitter. Was there anything that you solved in terms of a technical issue that you weren't planning on solving? Kind of one of those added, wow, now we've got this capability or something outside of what you had set out to accomplish, Phil?
Well, I think that it goes back to what we've been talking about collaboration. And I think that when we first went into it, we were thinking about email mainly and messaging and that kind of a thing. But when we really got into it and we saw the capability of collaboration, it kind of opened our eyes in that there's a lot of different techniques you can do with the ability to collaborate on documents and sites and things like that we hadn't really experienced before. So especially like in our training division, that example that I gave, the ability to do things from a layman's perspective and have the product come out looking efficient and professional was an unexpected benefit. We knew it was there, but it really caught on quite well.
Within this law enforcement environment, the idea of a virtual office, you lose some physical security. These computers, these devices are no longer stuck where there are a bunch of officers that someone isn't, probably crazy enough to go in and try and get at those devices. In the field, how did you address or think about security if an officer was involved in something with a parolee where a device got lost, had already been logged into? Now potential criminal elements could have access to a system of sensitive information. How did you evaluate security here?
Well, the officers we have a very highly trained force out there, and they're aware of surroundings that they're working in, and they're very attuned to safety and and moving in the right way and securing their vehicles, securing their equipment, and doing that in the first place. So it hasn't really been that much of an issue. But one of the great things about the Chromebook strategy that we're looking at is, versus the laptop strategy that we had been doing, is just exactly that. If the device is compromised and stolen, there's really nothing resident on the device. It's all up in the cloud, right? So that's one of that's one of the security features that we really like about the model, is that the devices are interchangeable, and in the event that something is lost or stolen, really if the person, there's nothing resident. They can't crack it open and get sensitive data from it. So it's actually a selling point.
A question I've been able to ask other folks a lot in the enterprise space on some of these teams that have gone Google has been, hey, did you have any naysayers? And every now and again, someone like in your position says, yeah, we did have someone that just, they didn't want to change, right? They were used to doing what they were doing. Did that happen at all for you? If it did, what were you able to do to convince those folks to come on board and say, no, this is the right change for us. These are the benefits that we're all going to receive.
Very little, very little negative. I think that at the very beginnings of it, there was some question mark or raised eyebrows about, wow, this is really, really new. It's really, really new to think about a different way of email in the cloud and so forth. But when you really study it and look at the FSMA certification and all that kind of stuff, it kind of allayed those kinds of fears. But actually, it was the experience of it itself that won people over. It was viewing the hour-and-a-half video, in our webinar, and it was actually touching the environment and experiencing it that set their mind at ease. They saw, oh, well, this isn't really that difficult after all. And our staff has actually, in a large part, embraced a culture of change. They realize that the product, the Google Apps Suite in particular, is being upgraded on a continual basis, and they see that as a good thing. It's continually evolving. It's not waiting for IT to do anything. It's evolving in and of itself as a product, and they kind of expect it now, and are riding that wave. So all in all, I think it's the experience of it in itself that wins folks over.
Well, and what you've just talked to is a theme that we've heard from a lot of folks, and it's a theme that the Google Enterprise Government team talks to folks about. It's taking what we're familiar with as users, consumers, and bringing that usability, the communications, the collaboration, bringing that into the workspace here, the government workspace, in that secure manner, in a way that we're used to working, and all of a sudden, wow, look how efficiently we can do our old job now with new technology, and things really do change. So I think you've summed up a sentiment that we've heard throughout this Hangout series here here, part of Innovation for the Nation. Here's what we're going to do. Phil and Dan are going to excuse themselves from this arena shortly and going to move on over to that network resources, the networking lounge, and join a virtual chat there as well. So if you have additional questions for those guys, join them in that chat room over in the networking lounge. They'll be there for about 25 minutes or so. And then the entire team from the Google Enterprise Government team want to invite you back to our closing keynote. That's going to take place at 1 o'clock Pacific time. Michael Jones will be with us for that keynote address. We're going to take about 30 minutes there. Really summarize a few of the things that we've talked about, but really move past yesterday and today and into the future, what really can happen, and some of the initiatives that these teams are really working on, and Google in general. Michael is the Chief Technology Advocate for Google, and I think you're really going to enjoy what he has to share with all of us. So join us back here just about a half hour from now, 1 o'clock Pacific time, as we wrap up Innovation for the Nation and this Hangout series.